Greetings everybody and welcome back to the Austin Lindsay channel. So today I'm building DIY sound tiles. So I did a bunch of research and I watched a handful of videos of builds and I kept going back and forth in my mind on what the best substrate would be. So Owens Corning 703 was kind of what I was most likely going to go with because it's what a lot of other DIYers were using and it's designed for sound absorption. But then I remembered I had a large strip of memory foam when I cut down a mattress topper. And the more I started thinking about it, the more memory foam seems like a fantastic substrate for sound panels, at least for somewhat non-professional use cases. And it's much easier to handle and work with, and it does a great job in absorbing sound. All right, so let's get into the build. And since I'm working around a specific amount of memory foam and I'm not buying to fit my needs, I did spend a fair amount of time calculating the best way to use the material that I had. This memory foam is 2 inches thick, and I decided to go with a total of 6 tiles, which meant that each piece of memory foam would be 11 inches by 25 inches by 2 inches. But the finished size will end up being 12.5 inches by 26.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And that's because of the thickness of the wood. So I used some super cheap, I think it's a pre-painted baseboard, and this was about $9 US for the board, and this was 10 feet by 2.5 feet by 3/4 inch thick. And I could have ripped the wood down to 2 inches to exactly fit my memory foam, but I liked having a bit of air gap between the wall. This way any sound that gets through the foam and bounces back through still has to go through the air gap and hopefully gets absorbed back into the memory foam. I also grabbed some 3M picture hanging strips because I really don't want to put holes in the walls, but these are going over my desk and over my computer equipment, so we shall see. If they feel even the slightest bit flimsy, I'll end up drilling. I also went and grabbed some fabric while I was out. I went with a soft textured cloth to wrap around the panel. You want your fabric or any substrate to be breathable so that way the sound can actually get through and absorb into your insulation or foam. And I also like to look for fabric with some sort of texture to it. I feel like this small amount of texture can help the outer fabric absorb just a tiny bit more sound. So depending on how you build your frame, you'll need to take into account the width of the wood when doing your measurements. So for my situation, since the foam is 25 inches on the long side and 11 inches on the short side, and I decided to place my shorter wood pieces within the longer pieces, that meant the boards covering the 25-inch side had to be cut longer to 26.5 inches to accommodate the end pieces, which are 3/4 inch thick. The end pieces, though, could remain the same measurement, which is 11 inches, as the foam itself. So I framed up all my pieces with just screws, and I can't stress the importance enough with drilling pilot holes, especially if you're working with cheap pressboard like I am here. And depending on how show-worthy you want your panels to look, I would suggest countersinking your screw heads. But I don't own a countersink and I was trying to save on costs, so I just left the screw heads exposed. Even with the wrap, they're still somewhat visible, but not very noticeable. So once I finished up all the frames, I test fitted the foam, but I needed a way to keep the foam in place, so I basically screwed it in place with 6 of the same wood screws along the sides. When I did this though, I made sure to put the center screw in first, that way I could stretch the foam to either end of the box if needed. It put indents in the foam, but what I did was I evenly measured them out beforehand so it looked intentional. Again, with the orange fabric applied, it's really not even noticeable. Okay, once the foam was in the frame, I cut my fabric and I actually overbought on fabric because I thought I would cover both sides, but I ended up leaving the back open so I had a lot left over. So I measured about 8 inches bigger than the frame so that way I could wrap around the 2.5 inch sides and the quarter thickness of the frame with a little bit to spare. So I tried both ways, but I ended up liking stapling the short sides first rather than the long sides. There's probably really no logic behind this, but that's what ended up working best for me. And then you could cut the fabric to suit the corners if you wanted, but I ended up just folding them as if I were wrapping a present. So then I used spray glue on all the sides, making sure not to get any on the foam, and then I stapled the fabric to the back side of the frame, going back and hammering any staples that weren't sitting flush. When it came time to mounting, initially I thought I would be able to stick the wood on the back of the panel, but after wrapping the fabric completely around the wood, I realized I may need to alter my plan. So I decided to go with some 2-inch shelf brackets and mount the brackets to the walls using the command strips and then hang the panels from the brackets. So I'd purchased large command Velcro strips. Had I thought about this beforehand, I would have gone with medium command strips without the Velcro, but I had already purchased the large ones, like I said, so I decided to just go ahead and use them anyway. But this method worked out way better in my opinion because I can take the panels off and put them back on much easier if I ever have the need. I also want to mention that I definitely did not do this the way a recording studio would be set up, where you work from your speaker point, hit the early reflections, back of the room, etc., etc. I use this space more of a content creation space rather than a recording studio. So since I record from random spots in this room, my 2 main goals were to 1, kill some of the reflections just bouncing around this nearly square room, and 2, to have it look good. So the placement is pleasing to my eyes, and just having some absorption up is pleasing to my ears. So when it came around to measuring and centering the panels, I was pretty lucky that the areas I was hanging were all evenly spaced. My longest wall was 8 feet, so I decided to hang the center and then work outward from there and decide how I wanted to space the other 2. So the other areas around the windows were 4 feet, so I just centered 1 panel within that space. So I ended up hanging the panels on the walls vertically on the 11-inch end, so I decided to space the shelf brackets 9 inches apart, and that way I could scoot the panels around to have some wiggle room to perfect the spacing. Okay, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. This is how the room sounds without the sound panels put up. I have the microphone about where I normally sit, about where my studio microphone is. Test. Hey. Test 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check. Hey, hey. Check. Hey, hey. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Check. Check. Hey, hey. Hey, hey. Hey. Test 1, 2. So to me, it definitely sounds a lot more dead in here. These are absorbing a lot more of the sound that was reverberating back and forth. So I'm quite pleased with these. All right, so that's my take on how to build and hang your own DIY sound tiles. If you guys do have any questions, leave them in the comments field. I'll do my best to answer them. And thanks everyone for watching.